The day her father looked through her like she was made of glass, Clara Simmons was 34 years old, standing in the marble lobby of the Whitmore Group headquarters in downtown Chicago, wearing the only blazer she owned, a navy blue one she had bought second-hand from a consignment shop on Wicker Park 3 years earlier, and ironed so carefully that morning that she had burned a small triangle into the lining near the left shoulder. She could feel it pressing against her skin even now. A small, secret imperfection that only she knew about. She had taken the train from the south side. She had woken at 5 in the morning. She had rehearsed what she was going to say in the mirror of the tiny bathroom she shared with her 7-year-old daughter, Lily, speaking quietly so as not to wake the child, watching her own lips move and wondering if she looked like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. She had decided that she did. She'd picked up her folder, the one with the proposal she had spent 4 months preparing, and she'd walked to the train station in the September wind with her chin up and her heart doing something complicated inside her chest. She had not expected warmth. She had not expected a hug or a kind word or any acknowledgement of the 17 years that had passed since the last time he had spoken to her directly. She had not even expected him to use her name. But she had expected him to look at her. He did not look at her. Richard Whitmore, founder and chairman of the Whitmore Group, one of the 15 wealthiest men in the state of Illinois, walked through that lobby with 2 assistants and a lawyer and a phone pressed to his ear, and his eyes passed over Clara the way eyes pass over potted plants and elevator buttons and all the ordinary furniture of a life. There was no flicker of recognition, no pause, no moment where something human moved across his face. He simply walked past her, and Clara stood there in her second-hand blazer with her burned lining and her 4 months of work pressed against her chest, and she thought, so that is still how it is. But what nobody in that marble lobby understood, not the receptionist who had called up to his office on Clara's behalf, not the 2 young assistants with their matching leather portfolios, not even the security guard who had asked to see her ID twice, was that this was not the beginning of the story. This was the moment the story had been building toward for 34 years. And what Clara Simmons was about to do would not just change her life, it would change his. She just did not know it yet, and honestly, neither did he. To understand how a woman gets to that lobby, you have to go back much further than that September morning. You have to go back to a kitchen in a small house in Rockford, Illinois, where a woman named June Simmons made pancakes every Sunday morning and sang to herself while the batter cooked, and where a little girl with dark braids and mismatched socks used to sit on the counter and watch her mother's hands move and think that her mother's hands were the most capable, most beautiful things she had ever seen. June Simmons had been a hotel housekeeper for 22 years. She worked at the Riverside Inn on Oak Street in Rockford, which was not a grand hotel, but was clean and respectable, and the kind of place where traveling salesmen stayed, and local couples sometimes booked a room for anniversaries. June cleaned 14 rooms a day, 5 days a week, and on the weekends she sometimes took on private cleaning jobs for families in the nicer neighborhoods north of town. She was quiet about her work. She never complained about it to Clara, not once, not even on the days when she came home with her back so tight she had to lower herself into a chair sideways and grip the armrest. What she did talk about, and often, was what Clara was going to be. "You are going to do something," she would say, and the way she said it was not a vague encouragement, the way adults sometimes throw words at children to fill the silence. It was specific. It was almost like a prediction. "You are going to build something that lasts. I don't know what it is yet, but I know you." Clara believed her. Children believe the people who love them most, and June Simmons loved her daughter with a completeness that Clara would not fully understand until she had a daughter of her own. What Clara understood even as a child, though, was that her father was not part of this picture. Richard Whitmore had never been part of the Sunday pancakes or the mismatched socks or the quiet certainty of her mother's voice. He existed in a different category, a category Clara had filed in her mind under the heading of things that do not include me, alongside private planes and country clubs and the neighborhoods north of town where her mother sometimes went to clean other people's houses. She had met him exactly 4 times before that day in the lobby. The first time she was 6 years old, and he appeared at the front door of their house in Rockford without calling ahead, smelling of something expensive, and looking at the house the way people look at things they cannot quite believe they are standing in front of. He had a gift with him, a stuffed bear that was so large it barely fit through the door, the kind of absurd, overscaled present that a person buys when they have money but no information about the child they are buying for. Clara had stared at the bear and then at the man and felt no particular connection to either of them. He stayed for 40 minutes. He spoke mostly to June. He left without hugging Clara, though at the door he had paused and looked back at her and said, "You've got your mother's eyes." And Clara had thought even at 6 years old that this was a strange thing to say to your own daughter, as if he were commenting on a resemblance between strangers. The second time she was 11, and her mother had taken her to Chicago for a weekend, which was itself an extraordinary event, the kind of trip June had saved for over 6 months and announced with more ceremony than Clara had ever seen from her. They took the bus. They stayed at a cousin's apartment in Pilsen. And on Saturday afternoon, June had dressed Clara in her best clothes and taken her to a restaurant near Michigan Avenue, where Richard Whitmore was already seated at a corner table with a woman Clara had never met. A thin, elegant woman with the kind of effortless jewelry that Clara would later learn to recognize as a sign that money had been in the family for more than 1 generation. The woman's name was Patricia. She was Richard Whitmore's wife. His real wife, as Clara heard one of the restaurant staff whisper to another when they thought no one was listening. The legitimate one. Clara had sat across from her father at that table and answered his questions. "How is school? What do you like to read? Do you play any sports?" And she had watched him the whole time, studying him with the focused attention of a child who is trying to understand something important about herself by looking at the person she came from. He was handsome, she thought. He had good posture. He laughed easily. He touched his wife's hand twice during the meal in what seemed like genuine affection. And every time he looked at Clara, she had the unsettling sense that he was doing math, calculating something, measuring, assessing, and that whatever answer he arrived at was being subtracted from his life rather than added. The third time was her high school graduation, which he did not attend, but sent a card to, a formal cream-colored card with a generic congratulations printed inside and a check for $500 tucked into the envelope. Her mother had stood at the kitchen table holding that card for a long time. Clara had watched her. June had not cried, but something in her face had done what crying does to a face, and then she had folded the card back up and put it in the drawer and made dinner. And neither of them had mentioned it again. The fourth time was at June's funeral, 8 years before that September morning in the lobby, when Clara was 26 and newly pregnant, and standing beside a casket in a church in Rockford, wearing the only black dress she owned, which was too light for November in Illinois. Richard Whitmore had appeared at the back of the church during the service and sat in the last pew and left before anyone could speak to him. Clara had seen him on the way out, had looked directly at him across the crowd of people, and he had looked back at her with an expression she had spent 8 years trying to name. It was not grief exactly. It was not guilt exactly. It was something between those two things, something that a person feels when they know they owe something they have chosen not to pay. He did not speak to her that day. And then 8 years passed, during which Clara raised a daughter alone, worked 3 jobs at once, and built something from nothing with her hands, the same way her mother had built everything from nothing with hers. She had started small. She had started the way all real things start, not with a plan, but with a problem. The problem was that she needed money and she had skills. The skills she had were the ones she had grown up watching: how to clean a space thoroughly, efficiently, completely, how to make something tired look new, how to move through a room with care and leave it better than you found it. Her mother had taught her these things not as lessons, but as life, the way useful knowledge always transfers best. She started cleaning houses on weekends while she worked a cash register at a grocery store during the week. She charged fair prices. She was meticulous. She was reliable in a way that, she would later realize, was genuinely rare. Not just mostly reliable or usually reliable, but the kind of reliable that meant when she said she would be somewhere at 8 in the morning, she was there at 7:55. And when she said a job would be done by noon, it was done by 11:40. And when she promised a result, she delivered it, even if delivering it meant staying 2 extra hours without telling the client. Word moved the way good work always moves, person to person, quietly and with conviction. Within 18 months, she had more weekend clients than she could handle alone. She hired her first employee, a woman named Dorothea, who was 61 years old and had been cleaning hotels for 3 decades, and whose knowledge of industrial cleaning products was more thorough than most chemistry textbooks. Dorothea became, over the following years, something between a mentor and a best friend and a philosophical advisor, the kind of person who appears in a life at exactly the right moment and stays. By the time Lily was born, Clara had 6 employees. She had named the company Groundwork Cleaning Services, a name she had chosen carefully, turning it over in her mind for weeks, because she wanted the name to say something about what she believed: that good things are built from the ground up, that foundation matters, that the work happening at the base of things is not less important because it is at the base. Lily was born in January, in the middle of the worst winter Chicago had seen in a decade. Her father, Lily's father, a man named Marcus, who'd been kind but not steady, had left before the birth, not dramatically but gradually, in the way that some people leave, retreating by degrees until one day you realize the space where they were is simply empty. Clara had not pursued him. She had looked at her newborn daughter in that hospital room in January, with the snow coming down outside the window, and felt something so absolute and clear that it required no thought at all. She was going to be enough. She was going to be more than enough. She was going to be, for this child, what her mother had been for her: everything. Lily grew up the way children grow up when they are loved entirely, curious and funny and a little old for her age, with a habit of asking questions that made adults look at each other. She had June's eyes, or rather, she had Clara's eyes, which were June's eyes, the inheritance travelling down through the women in an unbroken chain. She called Dorothea Auntie Dot and spent her afternoons after school at the small office Clara had rented above a dry cleaner on the south side, doing her homework at the edge of Clara's desk, while Clara worked the phones and balanced the books and scheduled the crews and handled the 100 small decisions that keeping a business alive requires every single day. By Lily's 5th birthday, Groundwork had 32 employees. By her 6th, 47. By her 7th, the September of the lobby, the company was operating in 4 Chicago neighborhoods and generating revenue that Clara had never imagined when she started cleaning houses alone on weekends with a bucket and a set of her mother's old brushes. She had also, in the months before that September morning, been approached about something that changed the scale of everything. A property development company called Harrington Partners had been assembling contracts for the maintenance and cleaning of a portfolio of commercial buildings they were developing in the downtown corridor. 17 buildings in total, a contract worth more than $11 million over 3 years. The project manager, a woman named Sonia Harrington, had heard about groundwork from 3 different sources independently and had called Clara directly, unannounced, on a Tuesday afternoon in June. Clara had been in her car outside a client's building eating a sandwich that was slightly too warm from sitting in her bag. She had answered the phone not knowing who it was, and Sonia Harrington had said her name and company name and the words 11 million in 3 years, and Clara had swallowed her bite of sandwich very carefully and said, "Yes, tell me more," in a voice that gave away nothing. The proposal she had been carrying in that folder into the Whitmore Group lobby was not a job application. It was not a favor. It was a business proposition. Because what Sonia Harrington had explained in their subsequent meetings was that the Harrington Partners portfolio included 2 buildings that were co-owned by the Whitmore Group, and that for the contracts on those specific buildings, Whitmore sign-off was required. Not preference, requirement. It was in the ownership structure. Clara had thought about this for 6 weeks before doing anything. She had talked to Dorothea about it on a Saturday morning in the office, the 2 of them with coffee, Lily playing on the floor nearby with the large stuffed bear that had lived in Clara's apartment for years, the oversized, impractical bear her father had brought to the house in Rockford when she was 6 years old, and she had never been able to quite get rid of. "You don't have to go to him," Dorothea had said. "There has to be another way around it." Sonia checked. There isn't. "Not for those 2 buildings. If I want all 17, I have to get Whitmore sign-off on the co-owned properties." Dorothea had looked at her for a long moment over the rim of her coffee cup. "And you want all 17? "I want all 17. Dorothea had nodded slowly, the way she always nodded when she was respecting a decision she wasn't entirely comfortable with. "Then you go. I go. And if he does what he always does?" Clara had looked at the bear on the floor, the ridiculous, enormous thing sitting there with its glass eyes and its permanent expression of mild surprise. "Then I have handled everything he has always done," she said, "and I handle this too." She had made the appointment through the Whitmore Group's corporate office, giving her business name and nothing else. She did not know if he knew who Groundwork Cleaning Services was. She did not know if anyone had put the pieces together. She would find out. She had found out in that lobby that he had not known, or if he had, it made no difference. His eyes had moved through her like she was furniture, like she was a potted plant, like she was the kind of person who exists in a lobby to be ignored. She had stood there for a moment after he passed, holding her folder, feeling the burnt patch in her blazer lining against her arm. And then she had straightened her spine, not performatively, not for anyone watching, just for herself. And she had walked to the reception desk and said, in her clearest voice, "I have a 9 o'clock with Mr. Whitmore's office. Clara Simmons, Groundwork Cleaning Services." The receptionist checked her screen. "Yes, Ms. Simmons, you'll be meeting with Mr. Whitmore's Executive Director of Operations, James Carr. He'll be down to collect you shortly." Not Richard. Not the chairman. The Executive Director of Operations, which was a title that meant the person they sent to handle meetings they hadn't decided to take seriously yet. Clara had sat in one of the low chairs near the window and looked out at Michigan Avenue and thought about her mother's hands. She thought about the way June's hands had moved over a surface, economical, knowing, never wasting motion. She thought about what her mother had said. "You are going to build something that lasts." She thought, "I already have, and now I am going to make him see it whether he looks at me or not." James Carr was 38, efficient, and had the carefully maintained neutrality of a man who delivered news, good and bad, for a living. He collected Clara from the lobby, took her to the 14th floor, offered her coffee, which she accepted, and sat across from her in a glass-walled conference room that looked out over the Chicago skyline, with the kind of view that was designed to remind people where the power in the room was located. He looked at her proposal for 6 minutes. She counted. Then he looked up and said, with genuine professionalism, but also with an undeniable quality of decision already made, "Ms. Simmons, we appreciate you bringing this to us. Your company's record is impressive for an operation of its size. However, the Whitmore Group has established relationships with 2 primary facility maintenance contractors, and our policy is to work within those relationships for co-owned properties." "Your policy," Clara said, "or Mr. Whitmore's preference?" James Carr blinked, not rudely. Just the blink of someone who had not been asked that particular question before, at least not so directly and so calmly. "They're generally the same thing. I'd like to speak with Mr. Whitmore directly." Another blink. "Mr. Whitmore doesn't typically take these kinds of—" "I know," Clara said, "but I'd like you to let him know I'm here. Tell him my name, just my name, Clara Simmons. Tell him I have a business proposition related to the Harrington co-ownership properties, and that I'd like 5 minutes of his time." She paused. "Tell him I'm also his daughter." The silence that followed was brief, but dense. James Carr looked at her. He looked at her the way people look when they are recalibrating quickly and trying not to show it. Then he stood up and said very carefully, "Excuse me for a moment," and left the room. Clara looked out at the skyline. She thought about Lily, who would be at school right now, probably in reading time, probably with her finger following the line of words across the page the way she always did, mouthing them slightly, even though her teacher had told her she didn't need to do that anymore. She thought about how Lily had hugged her that morning before school and said, "Good luck today, Mama." And Clara had wondered how the child had known she needed it. She thought about the proposal in the folder. 4 months of work, market analysis, pricing models, staffing projections, letters of reference from 12 clients, including 2 building managers downtown who had written things about groundwork that made Clara flush a little every time she reread them. Everything documented, everything precise, everything the evidence of a woman who had built something real. She thought about the bear. The absurd, enormous bear that had been in her apartment for 28 years, and that she had never once been able to throw away. And she had thought about that sometimes at night, and wondered what it meant, that she kept a thing given to her by a man who barely knew her existence, and she had decided a long time ago that it didn't mean longing. It meant something else. It meant she had never let herself forget where she had started, because the distance between where you started and where you stood told you the only story about yourself that really mattered. James Carr came back to the conference room 12 minutes later. He sat down. He was careful with his expression. "Mr. Whitmore will see you," he said. "He has 10 minutes before his next commitment." "Thank you," Clara said. Richard Whitmore's office was on the 32nd floor. The elevator ride up was quiet, except for the soft sound of the building doing what buildings do, humming, ticking, breathing in its mechanical way. And Clara stood in that elevator with her folder and her burnt lining and her 34 years of everything, and felt something she hadn't expected. Calm, complete, clear, absolute calm. Not the numb calm of someone who has stopped feeling, but the focused calm of someone who knows exactly where she is going and has decided not to be afraid of it. The office was large and filled with the kind of deliberate, tasteful things that money buys when it wants to signal that it has always been there. Not new, not flashy, just established. Heavy furniture. Good light. Photographs on a credenza that Clara did not look at directly but registered peripherally. A window that gave the entire city to whoever sat behind that desk. Richard Whitmore was standing when she came in. She noticed that. He was standing near the window rather than behind the desk, which meant someone, him or James Carr, had decided this should be a different kind of meeting than the one downstairs. He was 67 now. He looked like a man who had been handsome for a long time and was still handsome in the architectural way that some men age into. All structure, all authority, the softness long since organized into something harder. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She didn't wait for him to speak first. "I know you only have 10 minutes, she said, so I'll use them well. My name is Clara Simmons. I run a company called Groundwork Cleaning Services. We have 47 employees. We're operating in 4 Chicago neighborhoods, and we have a record that I'd like to believe speaks for itself, but I've brought documentation in case you prefer evidence over reputation." She set the folder on the conference table to her right, not on his desk, because she had thought about that detail and decided the desk was his territory, but the table was neutral ground. "The Harrington Partners contract includes the co-owned buildings, and I need a Whitmore sign-off to move forward on those properties. I'm asking for the contract. I'm not asking for anything else." Richard Whitmore was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her with that unreadable expression, and then something in it shifted, moved, became slightly more human. "James told me your name," he said. "I know. You look like her." Clara did not allow herself to feel anything about that right now. That was a feeling for later, for another room, for a night when Lily was asleep and she could sit with it properly. "The proposal," she said, "is thorough. I'd ask you to read it before making a decision." "I'll read it. I'd like an answer within 10 days. That's a fairly short window. The Harrington timeline requires it." He picked up the folder. He looked at it for a moment with it closed, his thumb running across the edge, the way you run your thumb across something when you're doing 2 things at once, holding it and thinking about something else. Then he looked up at her again and said, in a voice that had something new in it, something that might have been the beginning of something but was still too new to name, "Your mother was—" "She was everything," Clara said, "and she built everything I have. Now I need 10 days. She looked at him evenly, not coldly, not with anger or performance, just with the specific clarity of a woman who knows what she is worth and has stopped waiting for someone else to confirm it. "I'll see myself out." She took the elevator down alone. She walked through the marble lobby, past the receptionist who had called upstairs for her, past the security guard who had checked her ID twice, and out through the revolving door onto Michigan Avenue, where the September wind was doing what September wind does in Chicago, which is remind you that summer is finished and something harder is coming, and you had better be ready for it. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. She breathed, and then she called Dorothea. "How did it go?" Dorothea asked, her voice doing the thing it always did, steady, warm waiting. "I don't know yet," Clara said. "But I said everything I needed to say." "Did he look at you?" Clara thought about that. About the office and the window and the way he'd been standing and the thing that had moved across his face when he really saw her. About the folder in his hands and his thumb moving across the edge. About the words "you look like her" and the way she had not let herself feel them right then. "At the end," she said. "At the end, he looked at me." "Then you're already ahead of where you started," Dorothea said. "Much further," Clara said, and she meant it in more ways than she was going to explain on a sidewalk on Michigan Avenue. She walked back to the train. "And if you are feeling what I am feeling right now, that mixture of something proud and something aching, that sensation of watching a woman stand in her own power after years of being unseen, go ahead and hit that like button, because this story is nowhere near finished, and what happens in the next 10 days is going to change absolutely everything." The 10 days were not quiet. Nothing about that period was quiet. Though it might have looked quiet from the outside, might have looked like just an ordinary woman running an ordinary small business, scheduling crews and managing invoices and dropping her daughter at school and picking her up again and making dinner and going to bed. From the outside, those days might have looked unremarkable. Inside, they were a sustained and complicated weather. Clara went about her work with the focused deliberateness of someone who has learned that the best way to wait for a thing you cannot control is to pour all your energy into the things you can. She was in the office every morning by 7. She answered every call herself, which was something she had started doing in the early days and never stopped, partly because she believed that the person who ran a company should know in real time what was happening on the ground, and partly, and this she admitted only to herself, because she had a theory that the quality of a business is measured by how it answers its phone, and she intended groundwork to measure well. Dorothea came in on Monday and Wednesday mornings, and they went through the operations together. Scheduling, staffing, client feedback, supply orders, the 100 quiet decisions that keep a functioning thing functional. On the Wednesday of the first week after the Whitmore meeting, Dorothea came in, sat down, accepted her coffee, and said without looking up, "Have you heard anything?" "No." "How many days left?" 7. Dorothea made a sound that was not quite agreement, and not quite concern, but somewhere between them. "And the Harrington people?" "Sonia called yesterday. She's not pushing yet, but I can hear in her voice that the timeline is real." "Of course the timeline is real. Timelines are always real. Only promises are sometimes not." Clara looked at her. Dorothea was looking at her coffee with the expression she wore when she had an opinion she was deciding whether to share. "Say it," Clara said. Dorothea said it. "You should be preparing a version of this that doesn't include those 2 buildings, just in case. Have a contingency." "I have a contingency." "Tell me." "The contingency is that I get the contract." Dorothea made the sound again. "That is not a contingency. That is optimism." "The contingency," Clara said more carefully now, "is that if the Whitmore sign-off doesn't come through on those 2 properties, I go back to Sonia and propose a partial arrangement for the 15 she controls directly, with a renegotiated rate that makes the economics work for both of us. I lose the margin I was counting on from the co-owned buildings, but I don't lose the relationship, and I don't lose the other 15. Dorothea was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, the slow, respectful nod. "You have a contingency." "I have a contingency." "Good. Now stop telling me you don't need one." Clara almost smiled. "I wasn't telling you that." "You were telling yourself that. I was just in the room." This was the thing about Dorothea. She had a way of seeing through the performance a person puts on for themselves, the small, necessary fictions that keep you moving forward on hard days. She never did it unkindly. She did it the way a doctor checks a pulse, efficiently, precisely, because it matters. Clara had met Dorothea 6 years ago, just after Lily was born, when she had posted an ad for a cleaning position on a community board at the library, and Dorothea had shown up in response, wearing a coat that was immaculate despite being 15 years old, and carrying a folder of her own, letters of reference from every job she had ever held, going back 3 decades, all of them saying essentially the same thing in different words. "She is the most thorough person we have ever had. She is trustworthy, absolutely. If she tells you something is clean, it is clean." Clara had hired her on the spot, not because the business needed one more person at that exact moment, but because you do not let a person like Dorothea walk back out the door when she walks in. Within a year, Dorothea was not just cleaning, she was training. She was overseeing the standard, what groundwork standard meant, how it was maintained, how you brought someone new onto a crew and transferred the culture of care into their hands. Clara had given her a title eventually, Director of Operations. Dorothea had looked at the business card with that title on it for a long moment, and then put it in her coat pocket and said, "I was already doing the job. The card is nice." She was doing the job. She was still doing it. She was the reason Clara could walk into a building on Michigan Avenue and deliver a proposal with confidence, because she knew with absolute certainty that whatever she was promising the proposal, Dorothea was back at the office making sure it was true. On the 5th day after the Whitmore meeting, something happened that Clara had not expected. She was at a client's office building in the River North neighborhood, doing a quarterly walkthrough with the building manager, a man named Pete Gallagher, who was meticulous about his lobby floors in a way that Clara had learned to take as a personal and meaningful compliment when he said they looked good. She was on her way out through the lobby, her inspection notes in hand, when her phone rang with an unknown Chicago number. She answered. A woman's voice, professional, measured, but with something underneath it. "Miss Simmons, this is Patricia Whitmore. I was hoping we might speak." Clara stopped walking. The lobby door swung closed behind the last person to use it, and she stood in the middle of Pete Gallagher's impeccable marble floor and said in her most even voice, "Mrs. Whitmore, yes, of course. I understand you met with my husband last week." "I did. I wonder if you might be willing to meet with me, not at the company. Somewhere more. Neutral. I know a restaurant near your office, if that's convenient." Clara stood very still for a moment. She thought about that word, neutral. She thought about the thin, elegant woman at the restaurant near Michigan Avenue 23 years ago. The woman with the effortless jewelry who had touched Richard Whitmore's hand twice during a meal, and whose eyes had moved over 11-year-old Clara with an expression that Clara had spent years trying to decode. "When?" Clara said. "Tomorrow, if possible. Lunch. I can do that. 12:30. There's a place called Aldine on West Randolph." "I know it," Clara said. "I'll be there." She hung up. She stood there for another moment on Pete Gallagher's clean marble floor. She thought, and now the thing I didn't see coming, because this was it. This was what she hadn't planned for. She had planned for Richard. She had prepared for the lobby and the elevator and the 32nd floor and James Carr's careful professionalism and whatever Richard Whitmore's face was going to do when he really saw her. She had not planned for his wife. She called Dorothea from the car. "She called me," she said when Dorothea picked up. "Who?" "Patricia Whitmore." A silence. Not long, but pointed. "She called you. We're having lunch tomorrow." Another silence. "Clara, why is his wife calling you?" "I don't know yet." "What does she want?" "I don't know yet. Are you—" "I'll be fine. I don't know what she wants, and I won't know until tomorrow. So tonight I'm going to pick up Lily from school and make pasta and help her with her reading, and tomorrow I'll find out what Patricia Whitmore wants from me." She paused. "Is there anything at the office that needs me before 3? Dorothea made her sound. "No," she said. "Go get your daughter." Clara picked up Lily from school, and Lily ran across the pickup area with her backpack bumping and her hair half out of its ponytail, and her face doing what Lily's face always did, leading with expression, communicating everything before she'd said a word. Today's expression was excitement. "We learned about bridges today," Lily said, climbing into the back seat and immediately beginning to wrestle with her seatbelt buckle. "Like the kind you build, over water. Did you know that bridges have to be flexible? They told us rigid things break and flexible things don't." "I knew that," Clara said. "But did you know it about bridges specifically?" "Specifically now I know it. I think I might want to build bridges when I grow up. Or maybe clean buildings, like you do, Mama, because you make things better, and that's basically the same thing." Clara looked at her daughter in the rearview mirror. This bright, serious, funny creature, this person who had come from her and was becoming herself with such cheerful speed that it sometimes made Clara's chest ache. And she thought about flexible things and rigid things, and she thought June would have loved this child so much. "Pasta tonight?" she asked. "With the butter and the cheese or the red kind? Which do you want?" "The butter and cheese kind. But with some pepper because we're fancy." "We are absolutely fancy," Clara said. They went home. They made pasta. Lily added the pepper herself, shaking it over her bowl with extreme gravity, and Clara sat across from her at their small kitchen table, and they talked about bridges, and at some point Lily got down from her chair and went to look at the enormous stuffed bear that lived in the corner of the living room, which she had never questioned the presence of the way children don't question the permanent fixtures of their world, and she patted its paw the way she sometimes did, casually, and went back to her pasta. Clara watched this and felt the tender absurdity of it. This bear in her living room, this child patting its paw, this whole life built inside the space where a different life had been absent. She helped Lily with reading. She got her bathed and into bed. She sat in the dark of Lily's room for a while after the child was asleep, listening to her breathe, which was something Clara did more often than she would have admitted. Just sat in the dark and listened to her daughter breathe, reassuring herself of the specific miracle of it. Then she went to the kitchen, made tea, and sat at the table in the quiet. She thought about Patricia Whitmore. She thought about why a woman calls the illegitimate daughter of her husband and invites her to lunch. She thought about what that lunch might mean, warning or acknowledgement or something else entirely, something she couldn't map yet from where she was sitting. She thought about her mother. She thought about June sitting at this same kitchen table. Not this kitchen, but a table like this, in a house like this, in the specific quiet that comes after a child is in bed and the day is over. She thought about what June would have said about tomorrow. She thought June would have said, "Go in with your eyes open and your spine straight and let her show you who she is before you decide what to think. You cannot know what a person is until you sit across from them and give them room to surprise you." Clara drank her tea. She went to bed. She slept better than she expected. Aldine was the kind of restaurant that knew what it was. Good food, good light, no performance. Clara arrived at 12:28 because she was Clara, and was shown to a table near the window where Patricia Whitmore was already seated. 23 years had refined Patricia Whitmore in the way that time refines some women, not diminished, not aged in any wearying sense, but concentrated. The essential qualities of her become more rather than less visible. She was 70 now, Clara estimated, or close to it. She was wearing a grey cashmere sweater and the same quality of effortless jewelry Clara remembered from that long-ago lunch near Michigan Avenue. Her eyes were very clear and very attentive. She stood when Clara approached, which was a gesture Clara hadn't expected, and extended her hand and said, "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," Clara said, and they sat. They ordered. They did the necessary politeness of menus and water, and whether the bread was good today, and then Patricia Whitmore folded her hands on the table and looked at Clara directly, with the kind of directness that says, "I am not here to perform for you." "I'll tell you why I called you," she said, "because I think you deserve a direct conversation, and I'm not sure my husband is capable of having it." Clara waited. "I've known about you since you were 6 years old," Patricia said. "Richard told me. Not everything, not at first, but enough, and over the years, more." She paused. "I want to be honest with you about something, because I think you deserve honesty from at least one person in this situation. When I learned about you, I was not generous in my response. I was a young woman and my marriage felt threatened, and I was not thinking about what it meant for a child to be in the middle of something she hadn't chosen. I was thinking about myself. And I want you to know that I have thought about that many times over the years, and I am not proud of it." Clara looked at her. She felt something shifting in the conversation, something she hadn't expected. She said nothing. I want to tell you something about the proposal you brought in, Patricia continued. I have no role in the Whitmore Group's operations. I haven't for a long time. But I know my husband, and I know that when he called me after your meeting and couldn't stop talking about it, about you, it was not because he was planning to say no. Clara absorbed this. He called you. He calls me when something unsettles him. He's not good at being unsettled. She looked at Clara with something in her face that was complex and knowing and perhaps slightly sad. He said you looked like June. He said that to me too. Did he say anything else? He said he would read the proposal. Patricia nodded. He read it, she said. That night. He read it twice. Something in Clara went still. He told me it was the best organized proposal he had received from an independent operation in at least 5 years, Patricia said. He said, and I'm quoting him fairly closely because I wrote it down, he said the woman clearly knows her numbers, her market, and her value, and she didn't ask for 1 cent more than she's worth, which is exactly what a negotiator should do. Clara looked at the window, at the street outside, at the ordinary movement of the ordinary day. She looked back at Patricia Whitmore and said with careful evenness, "Has he made a decision?" "I believe he has. But I wanted to speak with you before you heard it from him, or from James Carr." She paused. "I wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead." "When you made that appointment," Patricia said, "when you walked into that building, when you went up to his office and told James your name, what were you hoping would happen? The business part I understand, but the other part, what did you want?" The question landed in the room with a weight that surprised Clara, not because it was unfair, but because it was the exact right question, and she had never been asked it so clearly. She thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. "I didn't want him to love me," she said. "I stopped wanting that a very long time ago. I think what I wanted was to be seen as a full person, not as a complication, not as a reminder of something inconvenient, not as the child he had decided not to claim, as a person who built something, who is someone." She paused. "And I wanted him to have to sign a piece of paper to do it." Patricia Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something Clara truly had not expected. She smiled, a real one, with something warm and slightly rueful in it, the smile of a woman who has decided to honor a truth she can see. "You are remarkable," she said. "You know that." "My mother told me," Clara said. "Often enough that I believed her." They ate lunch. They talked, not easily, not without the occasional careful pause, but really the way 2 people talk when they have decided to be honest with each other across a complicated history. Patricia asked about Lily. Clara showed her a picture. Patricia looked at it for a longer time than Clara expected and said quietly, "She looks like June." "The whole line," Clara said. "We all look like each other." "That's a beautiful thing," Patricia said. And she meant it. They finished lunch. At the door, Patricia Whitmore turned to Clara and said, "I think you'll hear from James Carr tomorrow." "I'll be there when he calls," Clara said. She walked out into the October air, because the 10 days had moved, and now it was October barely, but the weather had made the switch, and stood on West Randolph and felt the full, strange weight of the last hour pressing on her. Because this was the thing she hadn't planned for, not just Patricia calling. Not just the lunch, but what the lunch had told her, which was that Richard Whitmore had gone home and called his wife and talked about her, that he had read her proposal twice, that he had described her with professional respect, that somewhere in the controlled and deliberate architecture of a man who had spent 34 years keeping her at a distance, something had shifted. She did not know what to do with that yet. She was not even sure she should do anything with it. The business was the business. The proposal was the proposal. The $11 million contract was the $11 million contract. But she was her mother's daughter, which meant she believed in paying attention to everything, especially the things that didn't fit your plan, because those were usually the things that mattered most. She called Sonia Harrington on the walk back to her car. "I think you'll have an answer on the Whitmore properties within 48 hours, she said. "Really?" Sonia's voice was pleased and careful. "Good news?" "I believe so. But I'll call you when I know." She drove back to the office. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop and looked at the numbers again, the projections, the staffing model, the rate structure, and she thought, this is what I built. This is what she told me I would build. And it is. James Carr called the next morning at 9:15. The Whitmore Group was prepared to approve the co-ownership arrangement for both properties as part of the Harrington Partners contract, he said. The terms as proposed were acceptable. The legal team would draft the documentation for review within the week. He was professional and efficient, and the call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Clara put her phone down on her desk and looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at the ceiling. Then she picked up her phone again and called Dorothea. "We got it," she said. Dorothea was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "June is dancing somewhere." And that was the thing that broke it. Not any of the rest of it, not the proposal or the lobby or the lunch or the call, but those 4 words from Dorothea, the specific image of them, June dancing somewhere in the particular way June danced when she was happy, which was not elegant, but was absolutely joyful. And Clara pressed her hand over her mouth and breathed through it and did not cry in her office, but came very close. "Yeah," she said when she could. "Yeah, she is. Douche, because here is what no one tells you about winning the thing you built everything to win. It doesn't feel the way you thought it would. It doesn't feel like triumph, or not only like triumph. It feels like all the years stacked on top of each other, every one of them, the hard ones and the lonelier ones and the ones where she had been so tired she had stood in the shower at midnight and let the water run on her face and thought just a little longer, just a little more, just keep going. It feels like all of that at once, the weight of it and also the release of it, and also something achingly sweet that is almost grief. Because the person you most wanted to tell is not there to tell. She sat in her office for a while. She let herself feel it, all of it, and then she started working because there was a lot to do. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Share it with someone who has been building something in the quiet and hasn't been seen yet, because this part of the story, this moment right here, is the part that makes the rest of it worth it. And if you're not subscribed to this channel yet, do it now. Stories like this one go up every week, and the next one is coming and you don't want to miss it. The contract with Harrington Partners was signed in November. All 17 buildings. Clara sat in Sonia Harrington's conference room on the day of signing with Dorothea beside her. She had insisted on that, Dorothea beside her, because there was no world in which this happened without her there. And she signed her name on $11 million worth of faith in the thing she had built. And Sonia Harrington shook her hand and said, "I have a feeling this is going to be a very long relationship." And Clara said, "That is my intention." On the drive back to the office, Dorothea said, "What are we going to need for this scale?" "More people, better systems. I've been thinking about the hiring model. I want to grow from within wherever possible. I want to hire people the way someone should have hired us, with attention to what they're capable of, not just what they've already done. That's going to take time to get right. Most things that matter do." Dorothea looked out the window at Chicago moving past. "Your mother would say something wise right now. She would say, 'You already know what to do. You're just making sure by saying it out loud.'" That sounds right. It is right. She was always right. They went back to the office. They started planning. The growth that followed was not overnight. The things Clara built were never overnight. That was not her method, not her nature. Her nature was methodical, thorough, the kind of growth that comes from getting the foundation exactly right before you build higher. The same quality that had made her 14-room-a-day, back of her mother's hands thorough. The inheritance. By the following spring, groundwork had expanded to 63 employees. By summer, 71. The Harrington buildings were running smoothly. Pete Gallagher, who had added 2 of his own managed properties to the groundwork client list by this point, called Clara one morning in June to say that the building manager of the Harrington River North property had stopped him in the lobby to ask who did their cleaning, and Pete had given him Clara's card with, as he put it, great personal satisfaction. The work itself was what it had always been, only larger. More crews, more sites, more logistics, more decisions per day. Clara hired a logistics coordinator named Ray, who was 26 and had a gift for routing and scheduling that bordered on the supernatural. She hired 2 more project managers. She held a training day every month, mandatory for everyone, including herself, because she believed that how you clean a building is a skill, and skills need tending or they degrade, and she would not let groundwork standard degrade, not when the standard was the reason for everything. Dorothea remained the heartbeat of it. She trained the trainers. She established the protocols. She created a document that they simply called the Standard, a full account of what groundwork meant by thorough, what it meant by complete, what it meant by left better than you found it. And every new employee received a copy on their first day, not as a rule book, but as a statement of belief. This is what we are. This is what it means to work here. Lily came to the office on Saturdays and did her homework at the edge of Clara's desk, the same as always, while her mother worked. She was 8 now, then 9, growing with the same cheerful speed as always, still asking questions that made adults look at each other. She had moved on from bridges as a career aspiration to marine biology, to architecture, to, most recently, running a bakery that also somehow had a library inside it, which Clara thought was actually a wonderful idea. Could groundwork clean a bakery? Lily asked one Saturday, looking up from her worksheet. We could clean any building, Clara said. But would you? Do you do bakeries? We do any commercial space. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to her worksheet. Then, after a moment, Mama, why is there a bear in our living room? Clara stopped typing. This was the question that hadn't been asked. The question she had been waiting for, in the way you wait for something you know is coming eventually, that she knew Lily would ask when she was old enough to notice that most people didn't have a bear the size of a small child sitting in their living room as permanent decor. She considered how to answer it. She considered the versions, the simple version, the abbreviated version, the version that was factually correct and emotionally incomplete. And then she considered the version that was true. It was a gift, she said, from someone who didn't know how to give good gifts yet, or how to be a father very well, but he was trying in his way. Lily looked at her. Your dad? My dad. Lily took this in with the straightforward gravity she brought to most information. Do you know him? A little. I'm still figuring out what that means. Is he nice? Clara thought about this with genuine honesty, the way she had been thinking about it for months. He's trying to be better than he was, she said. I think that counts for something. Lily nodded. The bear is kind of amazing, she said, even if it's too big. It is kind of amazing, Clara agreed, because here was the part of the story that she hadn't fully expected, the part that had developed slowly, carefully, with all the caution that damaged things require, in the months after the contract was signed. Richard Whitmore had called her, not through James Carr, not through a professional intermediary. He had called her personal number, which meant Patricia had given it to him, and she had let that mean what it meant, on a Tuesday evening in January, And she had answered, and he had said, in the voice of a man who has prepared himself for something difficult, "I'd like to talk, not about business, just to talk." She'd been quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "I know I don't have any right to ask for that." "No, you don't. I'm asking anyway." "I know." She had met him for coffee on a Saturday at a small place near her neighborhood. She had chosen the location deliberately because this was her world, not his. He had come in the kind of simple clothes that rich people wear when they want to seem like they're not trying, and she had watched him walk to her table, and she had thought, he is old. Not ancient, not frail, but old in the way that time shows up on people who have lived with a complicated internal weather for many years. It shows in the way they carry themselves. He sat down. He ordered coffee. He looked at her across the table, and she could see that he was doing something hard. "I have not been a father to you," he said. "I don't know a clean way to say that, so I'm saying it directly. I was wrong for 34 years. I was wrong for reasons I could explain to you, but I don't think my reasons excuse me. I just want you to know I understand what I did." Clara listened to this. She felt, sitting across from him, the strange architecture of her own feeling. Not simple, not clean, the way feelings about parents never are. The way love and grief and anger and longing get built into a single structure that you carry without being able to take it apart. "Why now?" she said. "Because you walked into my building," he said, "and you sat across from James' car, and you said, 'Here is what I built,' and you were 34 years old, and you had built something extraordinary, and I looked at you, and all I could think was, I missed it. I missed all of it, and that is my fault, and only my fault." He stopped. He picked up his coffee cup and put it down again without drinking from it. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I don't know if that's something I deserve or even something I could ask for. I'm asking if we might be something to each other. Whatever that looks like at this point. Whatever you're willing to give." Clara sat with this for a long time. Long enough that the silence became its own kind of answer, showing him what it felt like to wait for something from someone who controlled whether you got it. Then she said, "I have a daughter. Her name is Lily. She is 9 years old, and she is the most remarkable human being I have ever met in my life. She has a habit of patting the bear you gave me when I was 6 every time she walks past it, as if it's an old friend. She wants to build things, like bridges. She is interested in anything that holds together under pressure." Richard Whitmore looked at her. Something moved across his face, something full and complicated and human. "I'd like you to meet her," Clara said, "someday. When it makes sense, when we've figured out what we are to each other." She looked at him steadily. "But I need to tell you something first. Her life is not a reparation. I am not a reparation. We are not here to make you feel better about what you missed. We are here because we have been here, building and growing and living the whole time. And if you want to be part of that, it will be on terms that respect that." "I understand," he said. "Do you?" "I'm trying to," he said. "I'm trying hard." She believed him, not entirely, not yet, but enough to continue. That was the decision she made, enough to continue. To leave the door not open, but not locked. To see what a man who arrives late could build with the time that was left. Because this was what Clara Simmons had learned. Not just from building groundwork from nothing, not just from raising Lily alone, not just from the September morning in the marble lobby, but from 34 years of living the life she had been given, with the mother who had loved her completely. She had learned that a person is not the worst thing they have done, not always. Sometimes a person is the worst thing they have done, and you protect yourself from them accordingly. But sometimes, not always, not without care, not without your eyes fully open. Sometimes a person is also capable of becoming something better than they were. And watching that happen, even slowly, even imperfectly, even with all the complicated weight of the years behind it, is one of the things that makes a life layered rather than flat. She did not need him. She had been complete without him. Her mother had made sure of that, had given her everything required to stand alone in any lobby in any city and hold her own folder and know her own worth. She did not need him the way a person needs air, or the way Lily needed pasta with butter and cheese and a careful application of pepper because they were fancy. But she was 34 years old, and her mother was gone, and Dorothea was wonderful, but Dorothea was 67, and the world was long. And maybe, a father who arrived late was still a father if he came correctly. She would see. The spring after the Harrington contract, Groundwork Cleaning Services was nominated for a regional small business award through the Chicago Chamber of Commerce. Clara found out from a letter that arrived at the office on a Wednesday morning, cream-colored and formally typed, informing her that Groundwork had been selected as a finalist in the category of Outstanding Growth and Community Impact. She held the letter in both hands. She read it twice. Then she walked it to Dorothea's desk and set it in front of her without saying anything. Dorothea read it. She looked up. Her eyes were bright. "June is dancing again," she said. "She is," Clara said. The award ceremony was in April at the Marriott Marquis downtown, in a ballroom that was a lot of ballroom for an evening that was, in Clara's estimation, fundamentally about people who loved something they had built, getting to be in a room together and acknowledge each other. She brought Dorothea as her guest, and Dorothea wore a dress that was also immaculate, despite being 15 years old, and she carried herself with the specific dignity of a woman who has been excellent at her work for 3 decades and knows it. They sat at a round table with other finalists and their guests. Clara wore a blue blazer, a new one, not second-hand, not burned at the lining, a proper one she had bought at a department store on State Street with the specific intention of honoring this occasion. She touched the lining inside the left shoulder once, feeling the good, clean fabric, and she thought of the other blazer, the burned one, still in her closet at home, folded carefully on a shelf, kept not because she needed it, but because she never wanted to forget what it felt like to wear it into a place you deserved to be. Groundwork did not win the award that night. The award went to a restaurant group that had opened 3 locations in underserved neighborhoods and hired exclusively from those communities, and Clara listened to the founder's acceptance speech and felt genuine respect, the kind that comes not from obligation, but from recognizing good work when you see it. She clapped hard. On the way home in the car, Dorothea said, "Next year." "Maybe next year," Clara said. "Not maybe. Next year." Clara smiled at the road. "Okay, next year." What she did win that night was something the award itself couldn't have given her. 3 conversations at other tables during the reception with people she hadn't met who had heard of Groundwork through the nomination and wanted to know more. One was a property manager from the South Loop with 2 buildings in his portfolio. One was a woman who ran a non-profit that needed a new facility maintenance provider. One was a man who worked in commercial real estate and whose card read, when she looked at it later, Senior VP of Acquisitions, Whitmore Group. She thought about that card for a moment. She thought about coincidence and intention and how you could almost never tell them apart with certainty. Then she put the card in her pocket and drove home. She checked on Lily, who was asleep in her room with one arm flung out and her mouth slightly open, who had been put to bed by the neighbor who sometimes helped on late evenings, who looked in sleep the way she always looked, entirely herself, entirely at peace, as if the world was exactly as safe as she expected it to be. Clara stood in the doorway of her daughter's room in the dark. She could see the shape of the room, the books, the drawings on the wall, the small lamp on the desk, the stuffed animals of various sizes, and in the living room beyond, catching the edge of the streetlight through the window, the enormous bear. That ridiculous, perfectly preserved 28-year-old bear, sitting in its corner with its glass eyes and its permanent mild surprise keeping watch over all of them. She went to the kitchen. She made tea. She sat at the table in the late-night quiet that had been her thinking space for years, all the way back to the early days when the company was her and a bucket and 6 clients and an uncertain future. She thought about how far it was from there to here. She thought about the specific texture of distance, not the miles or the years, but the interior distance, the distance measured in decisions made and fears moved through and mornings gotten up after nights where getting up felt hard. She thought about her mother in a kitchen like this one, at a table like this one, making plans for a life that was going to be enough despite all the ways the world had told her it would not be. And she thought, I did it, Mama. I know you know, but I did it. She drank her tea. She thought about what came next, because there was always something next. And Clara Simmons had never been the kind of woman who confused an arrival with an ending. There was the Harrington contract to execute, which would run for 3 years, and which was already proving to be the foundation of a new level of operation. There was the question of whether she wanted to expand to other cities. Dorothea had opinions on this. Ray, the logistics coordinator, had opinions on this, and at a recent meeting they had spread a map of the Midwest on the conference table and looked at it with a kind of quiet hunger that felt like growth beginning to know its own appetite. There was Lily, who was becoming more herself every day, and who would need things Clara couldn't fully predict yet. A good school when the time came, a world that was ready for her questions, and a mother who stayed sharp and present and curious enough to keep up with her. There was Richard Whitmore, who was trying cautiously in the manner of a man who had finally understood something important, but was not quite sure how to apply it. They had coffee once a month now. They talked. It was not easy, not smooth, not the kind of relationship that erased what had been absent, but it was real, which meant it had the texture of something that could, over time, become something more. There was Dorothea, who had told Clara just last week that she planned to retire in 2 years, and had been thinking about what retirement looked like, and had decided it looked like spending mornings in her garden and afternoons consulting for groundwork on a part-time basis. And she had looked at Clara when she said this with the expression of someone who had thought this through completely and was telling, not asking. Obviously, Clara had said, obviously you will consult. Obviously. Good, Dorothea said. I just wanted to be clear. Dorothea, you have never once been anything other than clear. Dorothea had made her sound, the one that was not quite agreement and not quite concern. I made an unclear choice when I retired from the hotel before I should have, she said. I'm correcting the pattern. Noted, Clara said, and appreciated. She sat at her kitchen table and thought about all of this, the company and Lily and Richard and Dorothea and the map on the conference table and the cities they hadn't gone to yet. And she thought about what her mother had said. You are going to build something that lasts. She had built something that lasted. But here was the thing she understood now, the thing that the distance from the beginning to here had taught her with a clarity that no one could give you in advance. The thing that lasted was not the company. The company was real. The company was hers. The company was the evidence of everything she had done. But the thing that lasted was something else. It was the standard, not groundwork standard, the document Dorothea kept and enforced and handed to every new employee. Though that mattered too. It was the internal standard, the one her mother had set, the one that said, you do the work because the work matters and you do it completely, and you leave every place better than you found it, and you do not ask permission to be excellent, and you do not wait for someone to see your value before you know it yourself. June Simmons had cleaned 14 rooms a day for 22 years, And she had known her own value, and she had passed it to her daughter, intact. And her daughter had built a company and a life and a standard of her own, and would pass it to her daughter in the same way, the same unbroken chain, the same inheritance. That was the thing that lasted, the inheritance of knowing what you are worth. There was a thing Clara had never told anyone. Not Dorothea, not Lily, not Richard in their careful monthly coffees. A thing she did alone, in the quiet, when the day was done, and the office was empty, and the city was doing its night sounds outside the window. She kept a photograph of her mother in her desk drawer. It was from a Sunday morning in the house in Rockford, a photograph taken by a neighbour who had come by for something and caught June in the kitchen mid-motion, turning from the stove with a pan in her hand, laughing at something, her face entirely open and alive with it. She was wearing a house dress, and her hair was pinned up unevenly, and she looked in that photograph like the most useful and the most beautiful and the most complete person Clara had ever known. Clara sometimes took that photograph out and set it on the desk. She did this when decisions felt hard, when the uncertainty of the next thing was pressing on her, when she needed to remember what capable looked like in its most natural state. She looked at her mother's hands. You can see them in the photograph, both hands, one on the pan and one extended as if catching her own balance in the turn. And she remembered what those hands had built from less than Clara had started with. And then she made her decision, whatever it was, and she kept going. She kept the photograph in the drawer and the bear in the living room and the burned blazer on the shelf, and she kept going. Because this was what she was. Not the daughter her father had ignored, though she had been that for a long time, and it had cost her the things it costs, the particular weight of growing up knowing there was a door that was yours and would not open. Not the woman who had walked into a marble lobby in a second-hand blazer and held her ground, though she had been that too, and she was proud of it, and she would always be proud of it. Not just the founder and CEO of Groundwork Cleaning Services, not just Lily's mother, not just June's daughter, not just any single one of the many true things she was. She was the sum of all of it. She was the woman her mother had predicted she would be, doing the thing her mother had said she would do. Building something that lasts in the way things last when they are built from real material. The material of work and love and the specific, unrelenting, generous courage of women who know their worth and do not need the world to confirm it before they act. Her father had ignored her for decades. He had walked through her like glass in a lobby, and it had not stopped her, had not slowed her, had not altered the trajectory of what she was building by a single degree, because she had never been waiting for him. She had been waiting for herself. And herself had arrived exactly on time. The thing he had never managed to be was someone who showed up, not for June, not for Clara, not for the ordinary, necessary, foundational work of caring for the people who needed him. He had been brilliant in business, she understood that now, had seen it in the way the Whitmore Group operated, in the structures he had built, in the respect his name commanded. But brilliance in the boardroom is not the same as presence in the room where someone small is sitting on a counter watching her mother's hands and needing to be told that she is seen, and she is real, and she matters in the specific, irreplaceable way that only she can matter. June had been that. Every day, without exception, without credit, without anyone signing a piece of paper to confirm that what she was doing was valuable. She had simply done it, completely and without reservation, and the result was Clara. And Clara was doing it for Lily, and Lily would do it for whoever came after her. And this was not a small thing. This was not a thing that showed up in any award ceremony or revenue report or $11 million contract. This was the architecture of a life that actually works. This was the foundation under everything visible. And Richard Whitmore, who had been brilliant in the boardroom and absent in the room that mattered, who had arrived at 67 in a simple sweater to a coffee shop in Clara's neighborhood and said I was wrong, who was trying with the specific effort of someone who has looked clearly at the damage he made and decided to try to do differently. Richard Whitmore, for all his billions and all his buildings and all the power his name carried in every room it entered, had never managed to build. This, his daughter had, from nothing, from 14 rooms a day and a woman who sang to herself while pancakes cooked. He had not been there to see it, but he was here now, at the edge of it, and Clara had decided, with clear eyes and a spine straight and the full use of her own judgment, to let him stand at that edge and look at what his daughter had made. Not because he deserved it, but because she was generous enough to offer it. Because her mother had made her generous, among all the other things her mother had made her, and generosity, freely given rather than extracted, was the ultimate proof of power. She finished her tea. She put the cup in the sink. She turned off the kitchen light and stood for a moment in the living room in the dark, and the bear was there in the corner with its glass eyes catching the streetlight. And somewhere down the hall, Lily was breathing in her sleep. And somewhere in the drawer of the desk at the office, June Simmons was turning from a stove with a pan in her hand and laughing. Clara stood there in the dark of her living room in the life she had built from the ground up, and she was not afraid of what came next. She was not afraid of the expansion or the decisions or the map spread on the conference table or the next conversation with a careful and damaged man who was trying to be better. She was not afraid of the long work ahead or the hard days that were definitely coming, because hard days always come, and she had proven to herself, the only proof that matters, that she could meet them and not break, that she could flex without snapping, the way a bridge flexes in the wind because it was built right, because the engineers who built it understood that what holds things together is not rigidity, but the intelligent capacity to absorb pressure and remain. Her daughter had told her that, about bridges, from the mouths of 9-year-olds who want to build bakeries with libraries inside. Clara Simmons went to bed. She was going to need her rest. There was so much still to build. If this story moved something in you, if somewhere in these words you recognized a woman you know, or a struggle you've lived, or a kind of love that deserved more recognition than it ever received, then this channel is where you belong. Subscribe and hit the bell, because every week there is a new story waiting here. Stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things. About the kind of courage that doesn't make the news but changes everything anyway. About women who were overlooked and underestimated, and who built the whole world anyway, the way they always have, from the ground up, room by room, completely. Your story matters. You know that, right? Whatever you are building, whatever ground you are standing on right now, however far you still feel from where you are going, you are already further than you think. And the next story we tell might just be the one that reminds you of exactly that. We'll see you there.